So my name is Jared Blades. I'm a branch chief of biological resources at the state office. Thanks for being here tonight. So the reason that we're here is because we're seeing more interest and more proposals for renewable energy than we ever have in the past. That's true across the entire nation. Private land, public land. It's certainly true in the West, and it's definitely true here in Southern Idaho. We're seeing way more than we ever have. 20 years ago, we might see a single project proposed every few years, which meant we at the Bureau of Land Management, we could focus on a single project and put all of our resources towards that. Now, we're seeing a handful at every field office, and we're having to divide our resources, and it's more than we've ever had to deal with as a Southern Idaho community as well. And with that comes a lot of potential change, a lot of uncertainty. It can be exciting to some and extremely daunting to others. And I want you to know that we know that communities around Southern Idaho are feeling that, but we also at the BLM are feeling that as well. So what are we doing about that? We're proposing, and we have started to revamp our strategy for how we handle applications in a way to try to increase consistency, increase our efficiency, and we're trying to increase the amount of communication that we have earlier in the process. So, why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing such an increase in proposals? Well, I'll talk about three primary factors. One is technology. Technological advances. Southern Idaho didn't used to be that advantageous. This is solar potential. You can see in Southern Idaho you've got some darker colors. But historically that wasn't ideal. But technological advances have made that more desirable, more profitable. So we're seeing more solar energy interest. The same is true for wind. This is wind potential in the United States. You can see in the Southern Idaho there's darker blue. But previously it wasn't necessarily prime, but now with technology it has become more desirable, so we're seeing more applications. So technology advances. Another piece is how we move electricity across the state. The black lines, those are existing transmission lines. I want you to focus on the red dotted line. These are 500 kilovolt transmission lines that are approved for construction that we'll see over the next decade put into use. These are major substations. So why is that important? These transmission lines are a major predictor of where we're going to see projects proposed because they want to tie into that 500 kV line, right? And the farther away they get from that line, the more expensive it is because they have to build transmission line to get to it. So this is going to be a predictor of where we're seeing projects being proposed. Another reason is just our national priorities. You know, there's a lot of talk about our need to diversify energy resources and a big push for renewable energy nationwide. So increases in technology, this transmission line capacity, and the national priorities, that has created this dramatic increase in proposals that we're seeing across the southern part of the state. So I want to talk a little bit just about our BLM Foundation in terms of regulations. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act, that requires us to manage for multiple uses and sustained yield. So these proposals for renewable energy satisfy that. It's a multiple use of the landscape, and it's a working landscape. It also enables us to grant, issue, or renew rights of ways for generation, transmission, and distribution of energy. So that's why BLM is required to look at applications. And we don't have a choice about that. When we get applications, we have to evaluate. We don't have a choice. So again, today what we're going to talk a little bit about and what we really want to hear from you about is how we've revised our process for receiving and processing applications. Again, we're looking for consistency, so that's both internally at BLM, how we handle applications, but also for project proponents. They know what to expect wherever they go. Prioritization, so that's whenever we receive applications, how do we stack that up with the mountain of existing work that we already have, and what are the merits of that project compared to other renewable energy that have come in the door? Another piece is communication. So how do we increase the amount of communication earlier in the process before it gets a certain ways down the road. Those are kind of the three pillars. Another piece of that is capacity. We're staffing up at BLM to be able to handle these applications. So within our process, up till now, this is kind of what we could expect. We would have a pre-application stage where a project proponent comes in the door, says we have this area we're looking at for wind energy. We start talking to them about what resources exist on the landscape, how the landscape is being used, resource uses, what are other considerations in terms of right-of-ways, and we start steering them on what they should be considering leading up into their application. The application phase is where the Bureau of Land Management, we start checking the boxes of did they meet all the needs of an application? You know, are they fiscally able to do the project? Will they be able to see it through? And then how do we prioritize that against all of our other work that we do? This last stage is one you're probably most familiar with, the National Environmental Policy Act, and that's where you see an environmental impact statement, right? Like you're seeing next door. This is where we have a project proposal, and then we look at a range of alternatives, and we get lots of public input. What we're proposing is to add a third stage. So before we even get to the environmental impact statement process, we're adding a phase where we're requiring an applicant to take a look at this entire suite of factors that we've talked about as early as pre-application and condense that into a summary report where they've shown that they've looked across the landscape, have looked across stakeholders, communities, all interested parties, and condense that into a summary report that they will deliver to the Bureau of Land Management, but that will also be available to you. So before we get to the EIS stage, there'll be a report saying what this project proponent found. Another piece of that is public engagement. So before we get to what you're used to seeing during the scoping period or the public comment period during the draft EIS, like you're seeing next door, we're requiring early engagement where they have to hold a series of meetings across the landscape and use that information that they hear from you to formulate that factor summary report. So all of that before we get into the NEPA EIS process. So again, this is the major change that we're proposing and that we're really working towards, an early assessment and report and early engagement. So what might you see in that report? This is just a sample of those issues and topics. You know, the full list is probably over 40 things, but this is a sample. So we'll look at, does it conform with how the BLM has proposed to manage the landscape? We'll look at cultural, archaeological resources, how we interact with tribal treaty rights, other federal, state, local agencies. We'll look at impacts to resource uses like livestock grazing, recreation, other resources like fish and wildlife. We'll look at how they're proposing to use water and access to transmission. So the project proponent is going to be required to look at all of these factors and a suite of other things, put that into a report, and talk to the public about that. And this is just showing how we're meeting our policy requirements to develop a structured method to document all of those things that I just described. So this is a requirement. This isn't optional for project applicants. One piece that I want to talk to you about is throughout that entire four-stage process, we want to look at things spatially. So all of those topics, whenever a project proponent or an applicant comes in the door during that pre-application phase, we sit them down and we look at the landscape and we show them spatially what we know about resources and resource uses, rights of ways, etc. on the landscape. And we do that because we're trying to identify early in the process and show them where are their potential conflicts, where are their opportunities, and where there are, how can you avoid or minimize those impacts, and if you can't, what's going to be the compensation for that? So that's the point of this spatial exercise. And I just want to give you some examples. So this blue, these are wilderness or wilderness study areas, and these are important because they represent kind of a no-go area, an exclusion area. So if somebody proposes a project in those areas, that's an easy answer, right? But we start stacking in other things. This is sage-grouse habitat. Now this is slightly different because different than the wilderness, sage-grouse habitat, some of it is a no-go, some of it exclusion. in priority areas, but other aspects of it are more of avoidance, like we just need you to consider this. So these layers are nuanced. Not all of them are go, no go, yes, no answers. Some of them just provide context. This is big game migration corridors. So again, this is not a hard no to a project, but it provides information that they need to dig into early in the process to start thinking about impacts, how they can avoid those, minimize those, or compensate for them. Now this is just 3 layers, and you can see it's already getting very hectic on the map. This 4th layer, this crosshatch, this is livestock grazing. So this is everywhere that we have permitted livestock grazing as a use. So again, this is just 4 layers, and you can see you'd be hard-pressed to find any BLM land that doesn't have some type of resource or resource use consideration. You know, you might find small parcels here and there, but no matter where you go, you're going to have resource and resource use considerations. So this helps us because a project proponent comes in and they give us a project area. They say, okay, we want to look, at this little area here. We can take that shape and, like a cookie cutter, we punch it through, let's say 40 different layers of resource or resource uses, and we kick out a summary report of everything that they need to be looking at whenever they're thinking about that factors analysis report. So it's a way of us summarizing and cookie cuttering through all those layers what they need to start thinking about. It's not comprehensive, but it's a starting point. It's also useful for us at the BLM because it kind of tells us what we need to be thinking about as well. So this is a spatial component that will inform that 3rd stage and the pre-application stage. So again, the importance of you being here is because we need your help, we need your feedback on what values are you most concerned about. And on some of the materials that you received, there's a bulleted list. So take a look at that. Think about which of those stand out. But more importantly, are there things that we're missing on that list that you can help us provide information about? Spatially, we want to know where are the places that you think are suitable for potential renewable energy development. And we want you to write about that, describe it. Why is that area important? Conversely, we want to know, are there areas that you're concerned about or you think are less ideal for renewable energy? Again, tell us why and describe where that's at so we know. And then lastly, again, what are we missing? That's kind of an open-ended question. Just tell us what you're thinking about this process. And then, as Brian said, we're going to use that and create our own document that summarizes what we've heard in this series of public meetings that will be available. So, thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, so as Jared mentioned, really gathering your feedback today is important. So what we ask you to do at this time is to get up and move to the back. Those forms that you have, as I mentioned, you can just take them home with you and do it online. It might be a little bit easier, but if you do want to fill them out here today, you can do that and provide it to us on the way out at the table. And again, that'll all go into a summary that will be available online. We anticipate in early May. That'll be there for all of you to see, but also for potential applicants to see, so they know what the public feedback is on what resource values are important and geographically, what areas might be. So, we appreciate you being here. We do ask, we're not going to do a Q&A here, but we have lots of people with BLM at these different stations that are here to answer questions based on their expertise. So each board is titled